2023, Kenya's biggest conversation gets into its second hour. Welcome to all our viewers, listeners around the world on our channels, on social media, and our audience here on KTN Home. Karibuni sana sana. We're getting into the second hour of our conversations this morning. CT Muga here with you. Eric is not here for some time now. Our guest host this morning is Abdullahi Alas. Good morning once again, Abdullahi.
Good morning. Subah wa accent.
I need to remember. I'll remember at some point how to say it.
Spell that. I mean, you.
Subah.
You see, oh, brrr.
Hey.
Start.
S-U.
Yes.
B-A-H.
Yes.
Subah.
Space.
Wanag. W-A-N.
N.
Wanag. G-N-A. Wanag. N-A-G.
Yes.
San. S-A-N. Somali is like Swahili.
But this is easy.
Subah wa accent.
See?
This is just so easy, isn't it?
Speed
CT?
test again. Bro.
Subah wa accent.
Thank you.
Subah wa
There he goes.
accent.
How am I supposed to get it?
Teacher of the Somali.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, this in sign language. My sister teaches sign
Yeah.
language.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And how do I say I have agreed a year?
Yes.
What is a year?
Subah wa accent, or nawat. Peace.
Peace.
Yes.
Okay. Teacher of the Somali language as well as governance expert is our guest host this morning. And we're getting into a sign language conversation and a bill for people with disability in this country, and how we're going to make life just a little bit easier to navigate. So as we get into our guests for this hour are already seated. Umi Harun is a nominated MP in the National Assembly and joins us this morning. Umi, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Very well.
Karibu sana, thank you for joining us this morning.
Asante.
Nixon Kakiri is also here with us this morning, and he'll say hello to us in a bit. So, Karibu sana. Okay. We're going to get into the conversation. We've had many talks about how we want to make life a little bit easier legislatively for people with disability in Kenya, to make life just a little bit easier to handle. And it has to be legislation, and Umi, you're front and center in doing that. Before we get into that conversation this morning and look at the details of how that opens up, CT is going to welcome us with, welcome you. Rather, he's done it for us this morning. Welcome you with today's proverb from Malawi.
Yes, formerly Nyasaland. Rocks need no protection from the rain.
Rocks need no protection from the rain. What do you think about that, Umi? What do you think the Malawians were saying?
I mean,
No.
I
What?
mean, it's a good
Proverb.
proverb.
I want to know what you think.
Rocks are always out there,
Yes.
and the rain is, it's a
Yes.
natural phenomenon that you cannot stop.
Yes.
So somehow they just have to. I don't know how to say coexist. You can't stop the aftermath of the rain on the rocks, like the impact. Yeah.
Yes. Well, you see, when we ask for your interpretation, that's exactly what you've given us. And it can't be wrong.
Okay.
Your opinion is not wrong,
Yes. Because that's your take. That's the beauty of Proverbs.
isn't it just?
Interesting.
A million points from CT Muga this morning. He never gives them, but hey, there you are.
You can tell our friend also to, if he can read and then he interprets in his own
Maybe
way.
he'll tell us later.
Yeah,
For sure.
yeah.
All right. So as we get into this, Umi, just off the bat with you, these issues, whether we talk about disability of sight, whether we talk about disability of hearing, disability of movement, whatever the case may be, it is real. It is a reality in the country today.
Yeah.
To be able to have legislation in place that guarantees that there will be care for people with disability, usually we have to see that legislators take that position, and you've done that. Give us a little bit of insight into the Kenya Sign Language Bill 2023.
I think for me, it's more than a bill. It's more of something that, touches on society, because bills come and go, but then my key agenda here is, can we at least start a narrative on matters deaf community? Because if you look at how the country has been, on how our society has been structured, then anything deaf issues, especially, and I'm keen on the deaf issue because disability in general has always been talked about, but the deaf agenda has been a footnote, something you just put at the end. So when I came into Parliament, immediately I said, this is something I need to set in motion, because I've been working with the Deaf Society for quite some time, even before I joined the political space. And just going through the history in Parliament, bills have been put in motion, but nothing as detailed. It's always the general things. Can we include the deaf people? Can we do this and that? So for me, this bill is not just a one-time thing, but more like starting a path of inclusion completely for the deaf community. So it touches on so many components of it. It touches on education, it touches on inclusion, it touches on, and I think something representation, but something more important for me is how exactly can we, because as a community, the deaf are already structured in their own way. If you've worked within their spaces, you'd realize they have some sort of leadership,
right? But
only that nobody can hear them outside. So when I entered their space, this is what they gave me. I didn't have to draft it. They already gave it to me as a presentation and said, we've been looking for somebody to sponsor this bill. And I said, fine, let me have a look at it. I went through it. In the entire period of December, I had quite some time with it, and then all I did was just put some additional pointers here and there, because they already had an agenda on creating the Kenya Sign Language Council, which caters for the interpreters and regulating the interpreters community. But something that I think I added in there was to make the sign language compulsory, because the Constitution recognizes 3 languages. It recognizes English, Swahili, and sign language. But from how we are seated here, we can speak Swahili, English, but none of us can speak sign language.
Well, none of us can sign.
None of us can sign, you see. And if we were taught it, just like Swahili from the word go, we would not have this barrier that we have right now. So my agenda is what change can we see in this country in the next 10 years? I'm not looking at now. For now, the bill will be passed, yes, but the impact will actually be felt years later when I'm no longer in Parliament. So that is particularly the agenda I have with the bill.
So what is that? This booklet that they presented to you obviously is structures that they are looking for. And I think that we would all be comfortable with having implemented. What exactly is this that we are saying needs to be done that doesn't exist?
Generally, just recognizing the deaf community as a group, that exists, that have their rights, because the inclusion agenda is almost rhetoric at this point, because we always talk, just like how we talk about youth inclusion whenever elections are closer. The deaf agenda is similarly to that, because anybody can come and say, we will support the community, we will support persons with disability, but they fall under the umbrella of PWDs. These are people who you cannot, tell they are disabled in any way at a glance, because they're not on crutches, they're not on wheelchairs, they're not, blind. So there are no physical signs to show that, they actually have some sort of disability, and what can we do for them? So often they're ignored. This entirely is just to give them the rights. How do I say that we've actually denied them, which they do deserve. So if we are to talk about inclusion, we just jump to so many other things, especially within the deaf space. If today, for example, you are an employer, and this is a real real scenarios that have happened. An employer comes and calls, for example, someone like Akiri to a room and says, I would like to employ you for a job, but they've never met him. So they've seen his CV very well, defined, very experienced, until he walks into the interview. Employers, back up. They're like, because it comes with a cost. You have to support them with interpreters. You have to at least make some sort of adjustment. Don't even go far. Look at our House of Parliament itself. I don't think we've ever had a member who's deaf. Only one county assembly has actually made some changes. I don't know if it was Kiambu, one of the county assemblies, and it was a sight to behold during the swearing-in ceremony, because the interpreter had to read out the swearing in on his behalf. And it was something that, at least started a conversation. But can we at least see sign language on our day-to-day in the workspace? Can we at least see a scenario where you just have to walk into a room, deaf or not, and you can still converse with each other? Otherwise, then, we are not really going big on the inclusion on matters deaf.
Okay, so if we look at chronology a little bit, just before you come in, Alas, if we look at chronology, 10, 15 years ago, everything that was done, and we're talking about in public spaces, was for those who are hearing.
Yes.
Okay. We started to see after that there was the inclusion of sign language in public spaces. Now we're talking about broadcasts, and then we're also talking about meetings, conferences, especially on an international scale. Then meant that it was necessary to have representation for those who are deaf. So now all of your broadcasts for TV, you will see a sign language interpreter.
Yeah.
You will have a sign language interpreter for big meetings, inaugurations and things like that. You will have that. So there are baby steps that have been taken to make sure that there is inclusion for those who will watch and those who are consumers of that information, right? So that is currently happening. We also know that there are schools for the deaf. We also know that there's certain technology that is now being implemented or brought in, but usually that happens in private sector. In the public arena, are we saying that in the public arena there is little to none that is being done to make sure that people who are deaf then are being made to be functioning members of society despite their disability?
I mean, I think we first of all have to appreciate the Kenyan Constitution, because after 2010, then so many things, came to light. But what you're describing is 0.01% of inclusion.
Yes.
Because like I said, today, if we are to talk about youth, it comes right at the end of any agenda.
Yes.
If we are to talk women, it comes right at the end. It's always a rubber stamp, something to just put in there to make us look good. That's the reality in our politics, in how we go about our day-to-day. Same case with having interpreters on TV or ceremonies, because, case in point, the recently concluded, and I think this is something I would have wanted Nixon to touch on, the recently concluded Climate Change Summit had so many interpreters, but almost little representation for the deaf community. And that's a challenge. Whenever we talk of inclusion for the deaf, it's always interpreters. We have interpreters in the room.
So that's enough.
But where are the deaf people? Who are you interpreting for? Because if you have not invited them to the room, if you've not engaged them in conversation, what's the point? So the issue on having them in events, I think, came after a UN declaration. I can't remember which event it was. That was when it came into action. And you see, it's a slight change, but if nothing is done as at today, as at tomorrow, as at next week, in the next 10 years, we'd still be stuck with interpreters on TV. And that's what we need to change. Yes, we are making some difference, but how far? Because, and I'd like to correct the bit on schools, for example. We've done so well in the in the primary level education, where we have the deaf units in primary. I think the Aga Khan, for example, has such a big facility. Come to secondary schools. I come from Garissa County. There's one special needs school in the entire county, which is which caters for the deaf, especially. It's called the Garissa Special School for the Deaf. There's one, I think, in Wajir, none in Mandera, if I'm not
It's
wrong.
only primary.
Primary.
Yeah.
No secondary school for the deaf. And I'm talking of one institution in every county,
Right.
not constituency. Like we have schools in every constituency. I think there's another one somewhere in Coast. There is another one somewhere in Western Nyanza. Why I know this is because of the transition rates. In the previous regime, they came up with 100% transition rate,
Yes.
which was at least to ensure every child goes to the next level of their education. Nomadic schools already have a challenge in terms of retention, in terms of transition. But specifically now, come to the deaf students across Kenya. We are talking of 800,000 learners at any given point. If you look at the statistics, 2014 primary and the same who went to secondary, numbers are not the same. The Ministry of Education needs to tell us, where are these deaf learners? In any functioning system, when a child enters school, they have to be monitored, especially children of special needs, whichever disability. And deaf is actually one of the smallest units I've picked up on, but I've set in motion another bill, especially for the special needs children in Kenya. The numbers are not the same. So we are losing so many learners across the way. Secondary schools need to be at least in every, let's try at least 2 in every county, because cultural barriers are there. When a parent has a child, especially who's a girl and she's deaf, they get extra protective because this is a child who cannot hear. How do you trust your child from Mandera to go and learn in Wajir? Because there's no secondary school in Mandera. You get my point?
Yes.
Come to university. You've gone to university. You've attended a class in university. How many deaf learners have you ever sat in a classroom with?
None.
None.
No.
Which year was that?
The previous century.
You see, myself, none for me as well. I don't know about you. So where are they?
The ones I've sat with are different of a disability.
Yeah.
Challenges with their legs, the hands, but they are hearing. And
No, the ones who are my classmates or year mates or college mates at the time I was there were predominantly blind.
Yeah.
They were blind.
yeah, so they're using, but the ear was okay.
Oh, they're fine.
Yeah.
Some even had just slight sight, but predominantly, and many of them were not born blind.
So, yeah, it's acquired disability
Yes.
along the way.
Like now in the show here, if you had someone interpreting for him, it would have been fair.
Yeah.
If you had an extra person
Yeah.
doing what Umi was saying
Yeah.
at the back of the screen there, then he will have watched himself. The screen like KTN
Yeah.
Citizen, like that, because we were talking about deaf and let me say this. Like,
There is someone who's coming.
yes.
It's just delayed. So
It just
waiting for
delayed,
him,
yes. So that
Yeah.
also, whatever we are discussing
He's part of the
is
conversation.
part of the conversation. Now, whether it's a motion or a policy or, or a legislation, it starts with a simple idea, and it's normally necessitated by the need. These things are coming because of the needs we have.
Yeah.
That's why we develop. Where she is, which is Parliament, is where they make laws, they amend laws, they repeal laws. Now, if you do not have a member of Umi is the daughter to my head teacher, Mr. Harun. So when you see her speaking with data and eloquence, she's the daughter of a head teacher in secondary school.
Mtoto wa mwalimu.
Yeah, mtoto wa mwalimu. So I saw her grow at when I was in Wajir High School. And I'm proud to say that Northern Kenya is coming up. But now on the area she's discussing, I have a sister cousin who is deaf. She went to primary, she went to secondary, she went to college. She married a guy who is also deaf. I think they're expecting a child or very soon. And they're doing well. I go eat from her house just to see how she does, and they're very communicating well, and they have their own world. I have a cousin, my sister again gave birth to a boy 22 years ago. He's now in the university. There is nothing wrong with having a baby who is deaf or blind. It's above you. But raising them in the environment that is very difficult is now the government's role to make sure that the transition is facilitated well. If now you go to Isli, I was telling my sister here, there is a supermarket called SafeMart Isli. It is employed people.
20 of them.
Almost 20 of them.
Yeah.
So the guys in the bakery are communicating to you in sign language. And the beauty is the other able people who can hear or see have also learned the sign language. Like for a lady in my constituency or from Northern Kenya, if you talk to him and say this, he will know it's a girl. You see, so learning is easy amongst practical work.
Yeah.
So what is that supermarket doing? It is also attracting other employees of the same predicament to come and work for them. One of them is from Ethiopia. He's not even a Somali. He's an Ethiopian working in the supermarket. I think he's also assistant manager or something. The culture of having deafs and blind, or someone having difficulty with the hands or the legs, either polio or bone, is seen to be a taboo in the African culture. But at that time, there was no availability of these writing machines for the blind,
Braille.
the braille.
Yeah.
Then there is the hearing devices for the deaf. I mean, there is clutches now. There is modern, wheelchairs. So technology has made some advancement. It is now the role of the government, especially the Committee on Education, to facilitate the smooth transition from primary to secondary to college. Because I'm told there are almost 80,000 who have either graduated from different tertiary, but the ones we have observed in the job market is about 20,000. So 60,000 of them are lying out there with no jobs.
One thing about governments, not this government, but governments, when it comes to such matters, you do not leave it to them to decide. They have to be pushed.
Yes, I know.
And they have to be pushed very hard. Because if those who do not have disability are already disabled in terms of getting what is justly theirs. Last week we were talking about a 28 billion deficit that is supposed to have been allocated to schools. 28 billion and has not been allocated schools. Now, you tell me, when it comes to a community that people don't understand, they're afraid of, they don't know how to handle or manage, because this is what happens in communities. Things that you do not understand fully, you accord them a superstitious understanding or interpretation. Because in many African communities, when somebody had a disability, someone was blamed.
Yeah.
Yeah, either the spirits or something or someone, but someone was blamed.
Especially the women who gave birth to them.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Someone was blamed.
Yes.
Now, they didn't know. They didn't understand. They didn't know what to do. But now, as you correctly put it, we do know. But a bill like this now gives us the structure and the framework within which you can actually work and push. Because in the absence of this, even as you're pushing, what is going to support that push of yours?
Yeah.
Yes.
Indeed. Over the break, we're going to pose a question for Nixon to answer. And this is in the light to what Umi had said. Look, we don't know where are the schools that we have around the country, for example, that are lending the support to those who are deaf. Who is helping out at that level? So what the bill does is introduce the opportunity for implementation of some of these things. And CT is going to help over the break as we pose the question for Nixon to answer when we come back is, so when you do open up the doors, what can we actually see that changes for people who are deaf? And so we'll come back and get a little bit more in terms of insights. We're looking at the Kenya Sign Language Bill 2023 on Kenya's Biggest Conversation this morning. Umi Harun and Nixon Kirika are our guests this morning. And we come back after the break. We take a look at the weather and traffic and come back and continue with that. Don't go away.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
This September, burudika ndani ya Star Times. Watch real life dramas on Rainbow TV.
Sijai kuwa hata na rafiki magician, so
Exciting movies on Filmbox, TNT, PBO.
I got a plan.
Telenovela.
I swear I'll always be faithful to you.
Enjoy world-class sports on World Football, Sports Premium, Sports Focus, Sports Arena, and loads of non-stop entertainment for kids.
Morning, SpongeBob.
Get the StarTimes aerial decoder at 1,199 shillings and enjoy the classic bouquet for 1 month free. Or the StarTimes dish decoder at 2,999 shillings and enjoy super bouquet for 1 month free. Get your decoder at any of our business halls or dealer shops nationwide.
Don't you forget it.
StarTimes. Enjoy digital life.
Ethan! Mommy! Mommy! Ethan!
From the depths of heartache to the heights of happiness, lives intertwine in ways you never imagined.
That's how I look at it, being the mother of high-missed children.
Secrets are revealed, alliances are tested.
It was your husband who killed my daughter!
Mommy! Mommy!
And true love faces its biggest challenges.
You know what? This is your fault. I warned you.
Love, betrayal, and endless suspense thrive in the world of soap operas at KTN Home. Tune in.
I saw the killer bride.
You mean the ghost?
With Glovo, you've got the city at your fingertips. Unajisikia kukula kitu different? Order a Glovo. Soap imeisha? Order a Glovo and get it right away. Download Glovo and get anything you want in minutes.
There are quite a few people who pretend that they will never read the new Nairobian newspaper. But you and I know very well that they all do. The new Nairobian, out every Friday. Nothing stays hidden.
Kwa majina naitwa Morris Msonyi. Hapa katika Isipe mimi ni msaidizi katika mambo ya utafiti dhidi ya kudhibiti wadudu katika mimea haswa kabeji.
Sasa tueleze hii push and pull ni nini?
Tunatumia mmea ambao unaitwa Desmodium na tunatumia pia mmea ambao unaitwa Blackeria. Kuna mmea ambao unasukuma mdudu na kuna mmea ambao unavutia huo mdudu.
Keep an eye on things and you're going to help us out. Let's talk on Spice FM KE on X.
Spice up your life.
It's 24 minutes to 8 o'clock, and we are having a conversation this morning about, a number of things. So the umbrella is the Kenya Sign Language Bill 2023. Nominated Member of Parliament Umi Haran is here with us, and we are also joined by Nixon Kakiri, who is the Secretary for Disabled Affairs here in Kenya. So here we are asking the question, so certain things need to be done. Certain things need to happen.
Yeah.
How many schools do we have for the deaf in Kenya today? Nixon.
There are 114, according to Nixon.
So according to Nixon, there are 114 schools
Yes.
In Kenya, spread around the country.
Yes.
Okay. How do we see...
How many students?
How many students are in these schools? Well, I guess we'll look at that question as we come into it later. Mm-hmm. But how do we see that as a result of the care that is given to these students, they're able to then develop? As in, how does 1 + 1 = 2? Because here we are advocating for, we need to do something, we need to make sure that the infrastructure is available. Have we seen that with the right care given to deaf students, to deaf people, to deaf children, that we see that they come out on the other side being functioning, contributing members of society?
Okay. It says most deaf kids are born from families who have hearing. Okay, that's around 90% of them. But those families have no knowledge of sign language. Okay, so the foundation of language causes these delays that they are proposing. Now, he has said, first, there's a need to understand that for these children to benefit, those in schools must understand sign language. Now, Umi put it very well. And what he says agrees with it. You see, if we simply go with the Constitution and talk about the languages that are in our Constitution as being recognized, then just like we make it mandatory for people to know Kiswahili and English, if you make it mandatory for even those who are trained as teachers to actually learn sign language, then we will not, this problem we're talking about will not be a problem. Because the classmates of the students who are deaf will communicate with them. The teachers will communicate with them. And even in the workplace, you will find that they're able to fit in. Remember, it is language. They can see, they can walk, okay? They can write. The problem is they can't hear.
They can't hear.
Yes, completely. No, not they can hear a bit. It's the first question I asked Nixon. So can you hear even a little bit?
Right.
Definitively told me he can't hear. Now, if he can't hear, but he can see, so why don't we use that?
Okay, so this question then will come up. There are some countries on this continent, normally we say, because it's outside. No, there are countries on this continent where sign language has been accepted and adopted as one of the languages of the country. Okay? So we're talking about Kiswahili, English, then you will have sign language as one of them, because again, it is a language, right? Would such steps then be necessary as a primary here? And is it part of the bill that you've put through to say that there should be a basic understanding? And I say this, I remember, as an example, I remember when I went to the Benin Republic for the first time and I was just starting to learn French, and they said to me, you need to know at least one or two things in French. At least be able to say, I want to go here. At least be able to say, it is raining. Basics, right? So is that what we're saying? Should we have the very basics of sign language adopted in Kenya to be able to deal with? I mean, 114 schools for the deaf is not a small number.
Yeah. I think South Africa is one of those countries.
Yes.
In July this year, they officially recognized sign language as one of their languages. But Kenya has been there since 2010. Literally, in our constitution, what South Africa has achieved today, we did that 13 years ago. So that is a step for South Africa. And whatever agenda they have with this, after, having the president sign that into their, law.
Into law.
I don't know what agenda they have, but for us, we've been there. The constitution was handed to us saying we have 3 languages in Kenya. We decided we will use 2 languages in Kenya. And that is a gap we are now fighting, because you asked what changes will we see? And I said, right now we won't see the changes. If President Ruto signs this bill to become a law, we will not see the changes in 2027. We will see the changes probably in 2032, so that the class that is in kindergarten today are able to get more teachers. And what this will do, in the bill, it talks about having a council, the Kenya Sign Language Council. What the council does here is, one, reinforce the fact that sign language is a language on its own. We have the Swahili Council today. It's not operational, but it exists. Sign Language Council will now come into play. What will we achieve? I can go to school, these colleges, and mostly the culprits are the satellite colleges. I call them third floor colleges. They admit students and they tell you, we offer Kenya Sign Language. We can offer that course. You pay 18,000, 4 weeks you have a certificate.
Oh wow, okay.
And you enter the workforce as an interpreter.
And how competent will you?
And you're saying this is not enough?
It's not regulated, because I can come and sign hot air for you. Who are you to tell if that's actually sign language? Literally, I can throw my hands around and
we did have the famous case of during the Nelson Mandela funeral. Was it Winnie? Was it Winnie Mandela? No, it was one of the Mandelas.
I remember
the sign language interpreter was said to have been essentially signing hot air. So who would know?
Because we have a graduate of 4 weeks, we have a graduate of 6 weeks, and we have one who went to Kenyatta University for 4 years to study Kenya Sign Language. All of them have the same accreditation. There's nobody to regulate who has the actual documents. So what we intend to achieve with the council is to first provide the right language for the children, so that we don't send somebody with 4-week certificate to a classroom to teach our children sign language. Then you have a disparity for a child somewhere in Nairobi who's been taught by a graduate of 4 years, and a child somewhere in Kiambu who's been taught by a graduate of 4 weeks.
Indeed.
There's no regulation.
How long does it take, would it take, for someone to actually competently know sign language in its entirety?
I think, for me at least, it has to be equivalent to what we achieve in a degree course.
Well, it's a language you can imagine. For example, if
It is
you're learning a
complex.
language, if you're learning a foreign, because that is it.
Yeah.
You're learning a language, you have to get into the business of the language.
Yeah.
You have to get into the culture of the language. Because reading a language and speaking a language colloquially is very, very different, right?
Yeah.
And so then, as you look and getting into it, you have to say, what are you learning? Because we understand English when you read it in a book, but being in community and speaking English is very different from the English that you see, especially where you are.
Yeah.
There's also a misconception, and I've seen some of the questions about that now, and somebody says, well, why would I go and get a degree in sign language when I'm not deaf? And it sounds almost uncouth to hear it, but it is a reality that we need to then approach and then get to. That it doesn't mean, and maybe you can give some insight into that as well, you don't have to be deaf to learn or teach or communicate any other subject in sign language. And why is that?
No, you don't, because you see, the question you're asking is simple. Can we just acknowledge sign language as any language? Then you eliminate that entire argument of why do I have to learn it because I'm not deaf. Simple. It's a language. Learn it, because you walk out of that door, you bump into a deaf person. What will you do? In itself, it's also a life skill you're giving yourself. If you're drowning and the only person next to you is a deaf person and they can swim better, you're dead. They can't rescue you because you can't communicate. So that is one way to look at it. But the point here is, once we are a talking nation, we are mostly a hearing nation. Once we accommodate this other group into our lives, things are easy. In fact, you just end the entire conversation on disability. As soon as you have somebody who can sign, you walk into a room, you can sign. You walk into a room, you can easily communicate with a deaf person. If this was actually acknowledged in 2010, 13 years ago, that let's start teaching. Which class was I in 13 years ago? I think I was still somewhere in, high school. But if this was factored in, the generation that was in kindergarten at that time are most likely either joining university now or just graduating. You just get an intern from that group, you'd have had someone who can at least easily sign for you. So the point here is, let's not look at it as a disability issue. Let's look at it as a life skill in itself, as a tool you need on your day-to-day to speak. Then you've ended all the disparity completely.
With languages, if you were to make headway in any country, some of these things have to be compulsory.
Now, that's why we're headed with the bill. Make it compulsory, teach them in schools.
Because if you ensure that there are teachers, people who are training,
Yeah.
and we have many teacher training institutions,
Yes.
and you make it compulsory for people to understand the basics and those who are interested to specialize in it, then automatically you will have a body of people and a sizable number who then can pass on the skill. Then number one. Number two, you make it mandatory for every government institution to employ people who have that capacity.
No, they will bypass you and say, because the law says at least in every hiring process include a person with disability.
Sure.
they will bring somebody on a wheelchair and they'll tell you we've included them.
Oh, yes. Remember what I said earlier on about government processes and how you go about it? This is not something where you ask them to please and speak nicely and sort of like add a little oil to your voice. No. This is something you pressurize and you push, because if not, as you say correctly, they have a way of interpreting these things to suit their purposes.
Very many. Just like how we've looked at disability in Kenya. I can't speak for any other country, but in our country, disability has always been about, can we create a ramp so that you can access the building?
Sure.
But if you look at the population, the numbers are not the same. We are looking at 2.5 million people. That at least, I think, 5% of the population. We have had, I think when Honorable Mwaura came into Parliament, is when the albinism conversation began.
And now that is not there, that conversation is no longer there.
It's no longer there. So for me, I actually want to challenge Parliament itself. When do we at least see a next member who is, then we can see how the entire process changes, because in the House, the Speaker reads out a statement. Maybe then we can have an interpreter right next to him.
Indeed. So we have a translator here with us now.
Yeah.
And so Nixon, to be, a little bit more involved in this conversation.
Yeah.
And the question here is, sometimes it is difficult for us to understand something without understanding the challenges that it poses, right?
Yeah.
So for you, Nixon, what are some of the challenges actually navigating this society as somebody who is deaf, with certain things not being put in place?
Thank you so much. To introduce myself, my name is Nixon Kakiri from the Kenya National Association for the Deaf. We have an estimate of 2.7 million persons in this country who are deaf. Out of the number, you see, most of them communicate through sign language, and most people do not comprehend sign languages. So when you meet a hearing person, so once you begin to sign, the first impression will be, how do we communicate with them? So that in itself is a challenge. So some people have shocks, and therefore they cannot continue the conversation. Some people will be patient, all right, and they will ask you, can you write? And then you begin to write and you communicate as you jot down notes together. Some people would inquire whether you want to lip read. We have several modalities, but communication poses the biggest barrier within the deaf community. And the biggest challenge, which we believe that the KSL bill is going to address, that Honorable is supporting, will be communication barrier. Because if you see, 90% of the deaf people are born out of families with hearing parents. And those hearing people do not comprehend sign languages. So when the hearing child is born out of a hearing parent, it is easy. They'll say mama, and then the child will hear, and then there will be a growth, a systematic growth of language, and also through environmental interaction. Whereas when it comes to the deaf child, it is difficult. So the parents themselves do not know how to use sign language. So communication barrier brings a big problem. So when they go to school, perhaps maybe they began their schooling very late, maybe at the age of 12 years. It means they begin school without a foundational language. So when they reach high school, they languish when it comes to writing. English becomes like a second or third language, just like Swahili. So that struggle greatly affects the education of deaf children and deaf people. So few of them succeed, but of course it is most challenging, because whenever they go outside the society, even when they are just walking around the outskirts of Nairobi town, we have many deaf people along the streets.
Okay.
So most of them are self-employed. They are informal employment. Most of them just doing menial business activities because of the communication barrier.
Do you think
it has contributed to a very big challenge, and I think it needs to be addressed?
Nixon, do you think that it would be necessary to make sign language mandatory in Kenya today?
Yes, it is imperative that everybody in this country needs to learn sign language because it is the third official national language. So it is a requirement according to our bill, and it's going to simplify many things for the deaf people. And deaf people will interact easily. And you see, it will be an advantageous thing for the hearing people because psychological research says that people who use sign language have stronger cognitive ability. So that means that if you learn sign language, it is going to be an advantage for you. So it is even psychological, and you will be able to interact with everybody in the society. Everybody needs to sign anywhere and everywhere as per the theme, and that's our primary goal, which is important.
Okay, so there are different languages in Kenya, and the assumption is that sign language is in English. So is there preparation, or already are we having people in Kenya who are signing in Kiswahili, signing in Luo, signing in Kikuyu, signing in the indigenous languages of the country, because it is then a language that would need to go again across the other languages? Is there provision for that, and is this also something that needs to be supported at that level?
Sign language is a standalone language. It is a visual language. For somebody who is interpreting, say somebody is speaking in Swahili or English or using any language, Kikuyu, the Luo, Kisii, that's okay. But sign language in itself, it's a standalone language. For instance, this is the sign for cup, as I'm signing it. If somebody is speaking in English and says cup, or somebody is saying in Swahili and says kikombe, the sign remains kikombe. I might decide to use my mouth and say kikombe, but the sign is the same. In the Luo, somebody will say okombe, but the sign is still the same. So sign language remains the same. It is a standalone language because it is a visual language. It is meant to be seen, based on environmental interactions. As most people have a lot of confusion because most people attempt to write sign language. Sign language is not meant to be written. It is a standalone language with its own structures, accompanied with expressions. For instance, if we say, I'm very tired, the facial expression needs to indicate that you are tired. However, when you are writing in English, you'll just write it, the normal English word, the normal English text. But as you sign it, it needs to be accompanied by a facial expression that shows that you are actually tired. So it lays emphasis. The expressions are important. And we also use handshapes, A, B, C, D, the alphabetical order, all the letters. This is the sign for Africa. This is how we say thank you. That is letter B, an open handshake, open palms. Thank you. So somebody needs to learn the alphabets first, and then from there, they learn how to fingerspell, and then you develop something called the handshapes. So we have something called the signing space. Most people do not understand the grammatical rules that are used in sign languages. So that one helps so much in interaction, and it will help us to have a better Kenya.
Thank you for that, Nixon. I mean, it's clear that there's an understanding of this from the very basics and what in turn needs to be done. Umi, this bill has already gone through the first reading.
Not yet.
Not yet? No. When will the first reading take place, and then what happens after that?
So I think the process is simple. You start at the proposal stage, then it goes to the speaker, it's approved, then it's assigned to a committee, then the committee can either shoot it down or approve it. So we just at the stage of the committee, we've done the first stage of defense at the committee because it's a money bill as well. It comes with some sort of cost to the taxpayer. about roughly 80 to 90 million every financial year. So we defended it. Yeah.
That's not a lot of money.
80 to 90 million.
Yeah.
Are you sure you haven't underestimated the cost?
Countrywide implementation?
The general cost would have been at least 180 to 200, but part of it has our own source revenue from the council itself through registration of regulating interpreters. So the fee they pay, meets half of the budget itself. So the rest is now supported by government. And this was done actually by the budget committee itself. So the estimates came to around 90 million. The budget committee has just approved it. So we are now sent to defend it before the social protection committee. Then we are on recess now. So hopefully once we are back from recess, the bill should come to first reading.
How many times a year are you people in recess?
You're the highest paid people.
No. I mean, every time you talk to MP, they're on recess. I'm wondering, where do people work?
You have to at least have time for your constituents. So that's why the recess comes. I think 3 times a year.
How many times in a year?
3 times.
Yeah.
How long do they last?
So there's a recess in one that runs from December to the New Year's. Then there's a short recess in April.
How short?
Okay.
Like 2 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah. Then there's another short recess. I think this one.
Yeah.
No, this is a long recess.
This is a long one.
This is a long one.
How many days?
A month, roughly.
Okay.
Then there's a short one again in between June. So 2 short ones in April.
That's 14
and the
each.
long one. Yeah.
So
we'll be looking forward to seeing how this actually does play out. It's been necessary, I think, to have this conversation this morning. We want to thank you. Umi Harun is nominated Member of Parliament and pushing for the Kenya Sign Language Bill 2023. Nixon Kakeri is the Secretary of Disability Affairs here in the country. And we want to thank you both for joining us this morning. Important issues to discuss, and we're very keen on seeing how this plays out. Asante sana to both of you, 3 of you, for joining us this morning. Continue with the conversation. It's 8 o'clock.